Welcome to the Whole Enchilada, a community of high achievers that fight the status quo, rebel against mediocrity, and make life happen. Let's go. Hello, Enchilada Nation. So excited to have you back today. We are continuing our conversation around wealth building. This has been a fun topic over the last couple of weeks as we've met with a handful of entrepreneurs talking about wealth. Back with me today is Joe Reardon. Joe, hey, how you doing?
How's it going, Marcus? Good morning.
Good. Thanks for joining me again. This is, I know you and I have had a lot of offline conversations around not only your and my approach to wealth, but it's been fun to see these handful of entrepreneurs growing in their conversation and having some eye-opening moments. Tell me some of your thoughts on the experience so far with this.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great getting, talking with people about this and starting this journey with them. It's a process, and moving through all that it's great and it's fun. We're excited to continue here today.
Yeah, one of the things that's been really interesting for me in this is the broad range of people that are leaning into this conversation, right? The one thing that we all have in common is some element of entrepreneurship, and that idea of they're all interested in increasing their education on wealth, right? Wealth isn't something that you just get. It's something you create education around, you execute, and you create that wealth. But it's been interesting to me to see that broad range of people in their 20s all the way to people in their 50s, all approaching this conversation at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's one of the great things about this. When in this journey together, we're all educating ourselves and moving forward. And the great thing about that is once you educate yourself about this, no one can ever take that away from you. And that's amazing. And so I think that's one of the great things about this. And it's about kind of taking control of what we're doing and what we're doing in our lives, right?
Yeah, exactly. So our topic of conversation today is obviously around the wealth building, because that is the series. But I think we need to give some more definition around like what is net worth. And what does that look like in the country right now? Because I think a lot of us get caught up in this, keep up with the Joneses, or seeing someone on social media that's claiming they have, hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever it is, and thinking, well, that's what I need, or that's what I want, without thinking of the path of how to get there, or what their wants or needs actually are, or understanding if they do want that $100 billion net worth or $1 billion net worth is, okay, what do I have to say no to so that I can say yes to the activities that are going to get me there, right? And everyone's end number can be a little bit differently, but it's them coming to the realization of what is important to me that's one, going to take care of my needs. Two, it's going to give me the ability to take care of those that I care about around me. And I'm going to leave the legacy that I want to leave behind me.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And so, I mean, really net worth, right, is it's your assets minus your liabilities, and it is the easiest way to describe that. And then you have a figure that what that, entails. And now you can have discussions. The other people will sometimes define it. Yeah, it's assets minus liabilities, but I don't count my house. I don't count my cars. I don't count all that stuff. But for the sake of our conversation, I think we just referenced it as basically all your assets minus your liabilities, right?
Yep, exactly. So let's take a bigger picture of this, like a macro level look at net worth in our country. And it's interesting, the one of the things I love about our country is we are the land of opportunity, and there's been a lot of people that have been able to create incredible wealth within our country, but there's an equal opportunity but unequal reward in our country, right? There's an equal opportunity for all people, but that doesn't mean that opportunity always shows up the same for everybody, depending on people's backgrounds, where they're coming from, what their familial background was, of how easy it might be to step into that opportunity. I do believe there's opportunity for everybody, but that opportunity always doesn't show up equally for everybody within our country.
Yeah. And I think and that's kind of a great place to talk about some statistics and what they mean, and how we can how do I say this? What they mean and what they can teach us, and what that means to us about what we need to know in terms of on our wealth building process. And so, after our conversation with everyone, I started researching this a little further, and I came some numbers, and they're pretty startling, right? Now we've all heard of stuff where we're talking about, hey, we know that a certain percentage of the population owns so much net worth. We talk about like the wealth gap in this country. We've probably all heard those conversations. But like, let's dig down. I found some numbers basically from October of 2020. It's from a Forbes article, and I thought it would be kind of appropriate to share some of these things right now.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, okay, so the first one, okay, so we always hear about the top 1%, right? So the top 1%, and as of this October 2020 article, in the United States, the top 1% owns 30% of the net worth of this country, right? So what that means basically, for every 3 out of $10 of net worth in this country, right, that top 1% of the population owns 3 of them. Now that's extreme, right?
Yeah, that's a startling number. I mean, if you look at that top 1%, we look at the massive amount of net worth that they have, and know that they have 30%. And one thing I love to do with statistics is flip them on their head. So another way to look at that is to say, okay, well, that means 99% of the country then owns 70% of the net worth, right?
Right.
But let's dig deeper into that.
Okay, so yeah, I love that you and I think the same way on that, and that's good because, like, yeah. So if this means this, then what's the reverse of that mean? What you just said. So even here's the more startling statistic, I think, that if you look at the top 10% in population, okay, in terms of net worth, so they own 69% of the wealth of this country. The top 10%. So if we flip that on its head, that means the bottom 90% in population, right, own 31%, right?
Yeah, that's an even more startling statistic.
I think so too. I think that's incredibly startling. And here's the thing, like, we're not trying to turn this into any type of political discussion, and it's funny because Marcus and I have very different political views, but this is what it is. Right. So I think in anything, assessing anything, you need to know what it is you're dealing with and what it looks like. And therefore there. And I think we can then all take some steps in terms of where we want to be and what we want to do for our families and our own lives. Right.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought that up. The fact that here you and I are great friends, very similar investing styles, different political views, right? Where I think a lot of us would look at a statistic like that and instantly want to go into a conversation around what our government or our preference in which side of government we lean on should be doing to fix that problem, or how they're going to fix it. Or realistically, right now, it's not necessarily we want to talk about what our side of the government could do to fix the problem. We want to focus on what the other side of the government's not doing to fix the problem, right? But I love that you and I have this relationship where that's not where we go, because the most important thing that any one of us individually can do to affect that statistic is start with ourselves. And I believe that's true with almost any global problem that we want to affect, is we can't have a global effect on fixing a problem until we look internally and start with us, start with our family, start with our community, and then we grow from there, right? So I think Absolutely. If a lot of us could look at this, we do have a disparity of wealth in our country, a big spread. Part of that is due to circumstance and where people came from, how long they've been in the country, what historically has happened within their family. That could be a whole argument itself.
Right.
However, we can't change anything historically that has happened, but we can affect what any of us chooses to do from this moment forward, right?
Absolutely. And I think, yeah. So I think the main thing is like setting all of that aside. Now, what are the things that we can do then that will help us in our family, in our situation, to help that thing? There's one other statistic that I think is important for us to include in here. And this is almost the most startling one of all. And is that the bottom 50% of our population own less than 2% of the net worth of this country, right? And that's quite frankly that's terrible. So that means that bottom 50% of this country doesn't have emergency fund, can't weather $400 something that happens, or they have very, very little ability to weather financial storms that happen in all of our lives, quite frankly, right?
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things we need to acknowledge then is like, okay, so that's where we are, right? And
Yeah.
so we need to look at this and figure out, okay, for our families and for ourselves, we need to say, man, we need to be above that, right?
Yes.
We need to figure out a way amongst ourselves so that we're not going to be in a situation where a $400 thing creates havoc in our lives, right?
Yeah. No, I agree
Um,
with that. I think about that statistic of the bottom 50% of wealth in our country, or bottom 50% of the population owns less than 2% of the nation's wealth. It's, to me, it's like there is a lot of work, a lot of charity, a lot of good that can be done in charitable giving. But also this is something that shows me the fact that this conversation is critical for our country right now. Is nobody talked to me in elementary, at home, in junior high, in high school, in really even college. I've got a business finance degree, and it was about how to manage finances, but it wasn't necessarily how to create and protect wealth moving forward, if that makes sense. This
right.
is one of the most crucial conversations, I think, for our country right now, is how are we each individually responsible for our own wealth? And if we can own that and create a path to our own wealth, one of the biggest opportunities we have with that wealth is then turning around and lifting others along that path with us, whether that's in job creation, in scholarships, in sponsorships. There's ways that we can directly impact that if we find ourselves in a position of better wealth.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And right. And so I think and it's just about, I mean, as we said before, it's acknowledging what is right now, right? This is what is. And we can't have a conversation until we acknowledge what is. There's a lot of things that can be done, hopefully, to in a sense fix that, or we can each individually fix that in our own situations, hopefully, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's our goal. And so from that point, I think we can kind of jump on to like the next thing we're talking about in the conversation.
Yeah. I think one of the things I want to touch on here is the idea of, generally speaking, when someone sets a net worth goal. I want to be worth X. Generally speaking, the majority of people within our network, that number's in the millions, right? But here's the truth of the matter is being a millionaire on its own does not carry the weight that it used to. Right.
Right, for sure.
The idea, even in our parents' generation, the idea of, if you're a millionaire, was like you've arrived. And that's not
Right.
necessarily the case nowadays. You look at the average cost of a
Unfortunately.
house, pickup trucks are going for $90,000 brand new off the lot. It's just like things like that. You look at that and you're like, well, realistically, being a millionaire does not mean what it used to. But here's some startling statistics to keep our statistics rolling here. Talking about the median net worth of U.S. families based on age across the country. And the reason this was interesting in these windows of age is, again, we have a lot of people leaning into this conversation that are at different stages of life age-wise. Age 35 or younger, the median net worth is 11,100. If we jump up a little bit and say, okay, age 55 to 64, the median net worth is 187,000. Then we start getting into what most people would say is, I mean, really that 55 to 64 is generally where people are like, well, I want to be retiring in that window. But even if you jump to the next window of 65 to 74, the median net worth in the country, taking the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor, we're looking at $224,000. So, Joe, I don't know about you, but if at age 65, if I only had 224,000 of net worth, that's probably not all liquid. Number one, some of that's probably in assets of the car I'm driving, some of the equity I may have in a home I'm living in.
Right.
I don't know how long I could live, even eating top ramen every day, carrying my health insurance costs and things like that, with a net worth of $224,000.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's startling, and yeah, it's true. The fact of the matter is probably not long, and for the vast majority of Americans, I think most of that may be in their house, as you said, like an asset. Look, well, no, here's the thing: if they have their house paid off, great. So at least they've eliminated that as a monthly expense in terms of the mortgage payment. Now you'll still have upkeep on the house and other stuff like that. So in that sense, maybe it's helped you out, but it's certainly not an asset that's producing money for you, right? And so I think it's unfortunate that if you look at that, I would say if you look at those numbers, probably the vast majority, it's in those assets that are not the income producing assets, right? Which are wrapped into net worth, right? But I think we have to talk about, we have net worth, right? But we have income producing assets and non-income producing assets. Now, at least in the case of a house, right? You have it paid off. Great. So you don't have that payment. But then there's also a lot of things too. Like you said, those truck, like $90,000 truck. Well, that $90,000 truck, obviously, as we all know, like 10 years down the road, you're lucky if it's worth $9,000, right?
Yep,
Maybe,
exactly.
right, or $900, right? But whatever those assets are, there's some mix in there. But at being realistic, looking at the numbers, you would say, man, that's not enough. It's not going to work for
Yeah,
most people.
exactly. And frankly, it's looking at those numbers, you hear about, these conversations around Social Security being available for our parents, number one. But ultimately, when we get to that age, the question is like, is there any opportunity to even believe Social Security is going to close that gap for us? Maybe, but the truth is, the majority of us that are leading into this conversation are also entrepreneurs, which we're contributing less towards that Social Security future. So you look at the amount of money probably that's being spent by the government to help the elderly now maintain a lifestyle. Like, we cannot count on that in the future. We are ultimately responsible for our own life now and the lifestyle we live, and what is either the lifestyle we're going to live or the financial burden we're going to put on other people when we become find ourselves in that position, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I talked to a couple different financial planners, and so I mean, I'm older than you. We have this conversation. We josh each other all the time about this. I'm 10 years older than you, so I'm 51, which means you just turned 41. All right. So, and if people at my age, good financial planners may say something like, "Hey, you know what? Maybe you're going to get 60% of that. Maybe it's less or whatever. I'm certainly not counting on that whole amount for that Social Security, right?" And I think for people in their 30s, what are we talking? I mean, some of them could be like, "Man, I'm not going to, maybe I shouldn't count. Maybe I should put that zero down in that column." I mean, there's a lot of unknowns regarding that. And so I would say it would be, let's put it this way. It would be really smart, I would think, if you're 30 to say to yourself, why don't I put a zero in that column? And if it ends up being a zero, hey, maybe that's some icing on the cake. Does that make sense?
That's the exact approach I take. I'm very conservative in building out my long-term game plan of what net worth do I need to have, want to have, to create the passive income that I can live off if I need to live off passive income, right? The day I choose to stop creating active income, how much net worth do I have? So let's shift the conversation to that. To wrap up this episode, is we've talked about how it is our responsibility to create our own net worth, protect our own future. But this is a piece that I think a lot of people have a hard time figuring out is, okay, well, what does that number need to be? And then they don't put much thought into it. If they basically just like, a lot of them are just like, okay, well, I want to be rich. And to me, rich means $25 million, or to me, rich means $1 billion, whatever it is. And they basically just throw a dart at a board and say, well, I guess that's my net worth number. And the majority of those people are sorely disappointed when they wake up at 60 years old and kind of pull their head up and like, okay, well, what is my net worth now? And the majority of the time, I mean, based on the statistics you're showing us, we know that the majority of people at that time are not in a position that they're probably proud of their net worth. So let's walk through an example of how to come up with that net worth number, that goal net worth number. Now, the idea behind this is being purposeful, and to be purposeful, you have to come up with that number, and it's okay if that number shifts over time. So for example, my personal net worth number has changed today at 41 than what I thought it should be as a 25-year-old kid, if that makes sense. And it's moved a couple times in my career as I've got different perspective on what's important in life, right? Mm-hmm. So you okay if we shift the conversation and how to calculate what that number is?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
So ultimately, the way I generally have, and I know, Joe, you take this approach, is generally the way I help people come up with this number is it's not starting with the end number, but it's asking the question of, okay, ultimately, what does the lifestyle look like that you want to live when you want to live off of passive income? And so let's just using an example, and this is the example we used in the conversation with a handful of entrepreneurs earlier this week. Let's say that someone's goal was $150,000 in passive income every year, meaning that I'm not working at all, but I have $150,000 that's coming to me off of my investments every year. Now, a lot of us could look at that and be like, man, that's still not very much money to live off every year. But for this example, let's imagine that, you know, this investor's kids are gone and grown and gone to college. They're on their own. The house is paid off. Their cars are paid off. So ultimately, a lot of their payments on debt are gone. And ultimately, you can live a pretty good life. Particularly if you look at the statistics of the world, like you're going to be living well above a normal lifestyle if you're living off of a passive income of $150,000, $200,000 a year. So that's why we picked that number for this example. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, sorry, let me just interject one thing. Yeah, exactly. Please. Like everything is relative, right? Everything is relative in terms of this conversation regarding that number. So I think we decided on that number because we thought, okay, yeah, this is someone, you know, who's been making decent income potentially, and that's what that looks like. So yeah, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, perfect. So for this example, let's say this agent has a goal of retire. The three things they need to know: what age do I want to retire? So let's say this entrepreneur says, I want to retire when I'm 55. They want a passive income stream of $150,000 when they hit that age. And now they need to figure out what are the non-income producing assets that I must own, because that plays into how much total net worth they have to have. In the end, a portion of your net worth is actually depreciating assets, not contributing towards your passive income, but then a portion of your assets should be working for you. The idea of retirement is you get to stop working, but your assets are now working in such a way that they're providing the income instead of you actively pursuing the income. So to come up with this number, ultimately, you have to figure out how much are you of your net worth is going to be in non-income producing assets. So Joe, rattle off a couple of things that fall into that category of what people probably would or could own that are non-income producing assets.
Okay, so spending time in New York City and California, I would say that would be home and car, right? But now I live in Utah, so that let's add to that list. So in Utah, that means probably boat, RV, ATVs, like stuff like that, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, come on, I've seen your garage.
You have seen my garage. So the idea behind this is to say, okay, what are all the things that I need, like a house to live in, and a car, but what are the things that I also want? And that's okay to want things that aren't necessarily needs, right? You earned that. That's part of this process. Is we only have one life, we should enjoy it. So looking at that, saying, okay, for this example of this agent saying, okay, they're gonna have a home, they're gonna have a paid off, they're gonna have their dream car, they're gonna have a boat, they're gonna have an RV. Let's say that's $1 million, just for easy math. Let's say they're gonna have $1 million worth of non-income producing assets, but things that are important to them to maintain the life they want. So ultimately now we need to say, okay, we know we at least have to have a net worth of $1 million, but now what portion of my net worth is going to be to work? And so now we need to come up with what is the average return that I'm going to get off of that other piece of my net worth that's producing passive income. Now, Joe, one of the things you and I talk about as we look at different asset classes right now, we demand a different return on investment depending on the risk associated with that investment. But from your perspective, as someone's approaching their retirement years, they probably shift into more of a wealth preservation and less aggressive in their investing. So what would be like an average return on investment that you think they could expect on those income producing assets conservatively?
Right, exactly. So yeah, you're going to shift your asset classes because you want to get into stuff where it's very safe and being able to get, so I'd say consistently over time. And it's funny, given interest rates, it's hard to say that, but let's probably use a number of say 5%.
Yep, I think that's fair, right? Because you and I both have investments right now that are making double-digit returns, and then we have some of our personal assets in some more safe investments that are single-digit returns. But I think on average, we could probably look at that and say, okay, because we have learned about wealth, we probably can at least be driving a conservative 5% return. I think that's right. So ultimately, if we take that $150,000 passive income per year, divided by 0.05, 5%, ultimately that comes up with $3 million. So for this, if I was coaching this entrepreneur to say, you want to retire at 55, you want passive income of $150,000, you want non-income producing assets of $1 million to enjoy the lifestyle you want. Ultimately, now we've just identified this person's end goal of a $4 million net worth could give them the opportunity then to become a purely retired, living off of passive income in that moment.
Yep. That's the way the math breaks down on that, really, right? I mean, I think that's a great example, given that criteria and giving those assumptions. And so you can see that's about 4 million in net worth. Now that's obviously a lot higher than some of these other things we've been talking about, right? And so I think that's kind of one of the big takeaways here is like, well, what does that mean? How do I work through that, right? And so I think that's the journey in a sense that we're on all together, is getting to that piece, right?
Yep, exactly. And that's really step one, right? Is and maybe it could be argued step two is one is the desire to start learning about net worth and owning that it is your responsibility. And then two is saying, okay, well, what's my target? What am I trying to accomplish? And just floating in the wind and saying someday I want to be rich is not a strategy. It's not an end game. So this idea is, and one of the things I want to encourage everyone on this call is hopefully this is open or on this podcast is hopefully this has opened your eyes a little bit to the idea of your net worth, your future financial stability is not the responsibility of anyone but you. Yes, every single one of us could identify things that we could blame for our current situation or why it's going to be harder for us than anybody else. It's easy to go into victim mode, but that in essence, regardless of your circumstance, does not help you move forward to affect your net worth. And so if I could have everyone take away two things from this podcast today is you are responsible for your net worth. It is possible. If you look at if we broke down that top 20% of wealth in our country, yeah, there's some trust fund babies in there, but I also believe there's a lot of self-made people in that top tier within our country that started out somewhere. Someone had a conversation with them of you can change your trajectory. And the last thing that I would encourage everyone is it's an easy math equation. Slow down for 2 minutes and determine what is your net worth goal. And then we're going to move our conversation into actionables. Like, how do we start on that path today? Any closing comments, Joe?
No, I think that's great. We're excited to get in the next part where we're going to take some action in terms of figuring out how to start in some of those ways, get that process moving. What you said is very true. That knowing where you are, knowing what's going on. And we can't take action until we look at the situation and assess it in a realistic way, right? And I think that's what we tried to do in this situation, and kind of put it in context with the world that we live in too, right? And that's important because we have to understand there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be competing for our attention and our mind space in terms of what we're doing and how we're trying to achieve it. And so having the ideas and having the real life data to look at and go, here's where like net worth is kind of in the world, and here's where the net worth I'm going to need for me to be at a place that I'm looking to be, right? And then and that's why the statistics are so eye-opening, because and quite frankly that they're jarring, right? They're jarring, and but now it allows us to then maybe hopefully focus and go, okay, now I know why I need to focus and how I need to focus, and we're continuing along that path.
Love it. So our next episode, we're going to be talking about money rules, creating rules for your money that are going to get you on a path of success. And then all you got to do is follow those money rules. So Enchilada Nation, thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed what you heard today, I'm going to encourage you to do a couple things. Go to social media, like, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Let's follow this. And ultimately what I want you to do is who in your world would benefit from this conversation, and let's enjoy them to go down this path with us. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. And don't forget, go live life on your terms.